Hey everybody, and welcome to Dpad Experience presents Marvel Champions. Dpad Experience is a weekly video game podcast published on all podcast platforms. Alright, so I don't know if you've been following, but I have recently gone through all of the villains in the game, and I want to rank them now. I'm going to rank them based on difficulty. Now, in my opinion, difficulty is subjective, right? Difficulty is subjective, and here's how I'm basing my personal rankings on them. I play true solo only, right? So this difficulty ranking is for true solo. The game is RNG based, right? So a lot of this depended on what I drew. Maybe you had a better draw than me. And a lot of this is based on play style. We all play differently, right? So maybe the villain just doesn't work for my playstyle and I struggle against them. But I'm going to show you how I have the villains ranked in terms of difficulty in case maybe you're wondering or you want to see who you might want to play based on my difficulty rankings. All right, so here's what I've decided to do. I'm not ranking them based on like number 8, number 7, because again, it's all RNG, so maybe some cards came out when you weren't ready for them. So I have a tier ranking, and we are going to rank them into tiers, right? And they kind of all fall into the same area. And I don't have enough space to do everything, so we're going to get creative at the end. All right, so we're going to start with our E tier ranking. E as in easy. I find these guys easy if you're just starting out. If you want to test a brand new character, these are the ones I recommend doing it against. All right, number 1, we have Norman Osborn, Risky Business. This one isn't that hard. Once he doesn't really attack you at all, so you can build up an engine and not really have to worry about anything at all. And it's a very easy fight for the most part. Next one, we have Drang. I personally find this fight very easy. I don't think I've ever lost against him. He has some cards that can make things a little bit difficult, but you also get the Milano in the fight, which controls the threat. I personally find him pretty easy. He doesn't have a lot of health. He doesn't scheme for too much, so you can flip fairly often. I've never really had to worry about his forced response too much, so I think he's pretty easy. Next, we have Absorbing Man. Absorbing Man doesn't do much. He plays a lot on his counters that he gets on his deck, and his environments that he gets, and a lot of them have to do with making undefended attacks, but they don't do too much. So number 1, if you defend against them, they're negated. Number 2, if you don't defend against them, they're not that bad anyway. He doesn't have that much health. I've never really had a problem with him. Pretty easy. Sandman, also what I like to call a new Rhino. So again, he's very similar to Rhino. He's very similar to Absorbing Man. He's got a little more health than both of them, right? He can run through his encounter deck fairly quickly by having sand counters on. And the more sand counters, the more cards you discard from the encounter deck, which would give you an acceleration token. But what I've learned is if you have an ally out with a decent attack, you never need to attack with him. You can just exhaust or remove sand counters, and it completely negates technically his only ability. So, pretty easy. Next, we have Dr. Octopus. Sorry, not Dr. The Sinister Six. So, if you notice, we have 2 of the most recent Sinister Motive villains in here, right? Sinister Six, not that hard. There are 6 of them, and it's definitely a step up when playing multiple villains. You really only have to worry about the one main scheme. They all have relatively low health. You get a bonus for defeating them, so you can keep threat off the main scheme, and you basically win by you can't threat out. You win by taking threat off the main scheme, which can be done by defeating them. So they're pretty easy. Even when multiple of them have come out against me, I've gotten them out in a turn or 2. Next, we have Mysterio. All right. Again, another character from Sinister Motives. So even though they're easy, I do like that we have some easier villains to play against, but I didn't think he was that hard at all. I honestly can't remember what he did too much against me, but he's probably one of the easier villains in the game unless he gets one of his particular minions out. But aside from that, relatively easy. And of course, everyone's favorite punching bag, Rhino. Rhino overall is an easy fight. He really only can beat you. He gets strong, right? And he has a couple cards that can make his attack high, but he's got like such a low threat. The only thing about him that's difficult is his scheme. There's only one version of it. It threats out at 7. So that's actually, he can get strong, but his most difficult thing to deal with is his scheme. You know, if he pulls out that Red Skull advance card, the game is over. I've lost to him in one turn before. It doesn't mean he's hard. It just means he's swingy. So once you know what to do against him, he's extremely easy. All right, so this is our E tier. E for easy. Now we are going to move into our D tier, which I have called D for deck testing, right? Once you have a deck that you kind of like, and after you've ran it through one of these easy characters just to get used to it, like this bottom row is for getting used to a deck, you can really see how your deck is with what I call these deck tester decks. And remember, I'm doing this in terms of difficulty. Wrecking Crew. This is not a deck tester deck. I have it in the D tier because I do find that it is slightly more difficult than these, mainly because there's 4 of them and they're not particularly hard, but they can be unbelievably swingy. Like when I ran to pull an encounter card, the encounter card was like, this villain attacks, but then another villain attacks, and I think I went one turn with 3 of them attacking me. So they can be pretty swingy. They have a decent amount of health as well. So don't deck test against them, but I do think they are a slight step up in difficulty than this row. All right, these are my actual 3 main deck testers to see if a deck is doing well, meaning can the deck work against controlling a scheme? Can the deck work against controlling minions? Can the deck take out the health? All right, and I only have 3 of them. First one is Ebony Maw. I don't think he's extremely hard, but he does have a good amount of scheme to him, and he can get a bunch of spell counters out, which aren't the most difficult, but they can throw you off your game. So in my last game, I had, I think, 5 or 6 spells out that all triggered at the same time. So I wouldn't call him swingy, but he is a good card to test your deck against, to see if you can control the main scheme, to see if you can be able to flip and heal and things like that. Next, we have Crossbones. So I like testing decks against him because his first scheme is only 3, and it really tests you to see if you can control a low threat scheme before it flips. It doesn't really do too much when it flips. He gets an extra weapon attachment, and you need to spend you need to spend resources to take the weapon off of him, which kind of hurt your deck, and you can't play cards because you have to spend the resources. So you have to control the scheme, spend resources to keep weapons off of him, and he can still add weapon attachments. So I do think he's a little hard, not hard, but he does test your deck to see if you can do multiple things at once. And lastly is Taskmaster. Probably the easiest out of this bunch, but he does punish you for flipping. So when you flip from alter ego to hero, you essentially take damage unless you draw that one card, particularly with no boosts on it. But you basically are punished for flipping, right? Number 1. You do get a slight help if you can draw the kidnapped hero one side scheme, because then you can get a free hero to help you. But also, when you're in hero form, his main scheme will choose you to have you choose either take a damage or put a threat. So you do have a lot to consider here. You have to think if you want to flip, right? Because if you flip, you have to heal, because when you flip back to hero form, he's going to damage you. So if you need to make a conscious decision that, okay, I am going to flip and I must heal, because when you flip back, if he draws a 3 card, it could completely negate your heal and waste a turn. So he has a lot to have you thinking about. So this is my D tier, D for deck testing. Now we move into, let's see, E, D, my C tier. C as in challenge. This is your first challenge, right? Once you've tested your deck, if you want to like see how you're doing and you want to challenge yourself to a fight, I got these out. All right. First, we have Kang the Conqueror. This is a scenario fight. It's not particularly difficult, but it is long. Okay? So what the challenge is for him is his phase 2 and 3 for the most part. His phase 2 is fairly easy because you can't scheme out. Like, you should just build up your engine on phase 2, but that doesn't mean he doesn't attack, right? So you just have to be defending, and as long as you get good cards drawn, you can defeat him. But the fight is long, very long. So I consider it a challenge because your deck has to be ready to play a long game. If you have someone who's meant to win a short game, I just recently did a game with the Hulk where I won in like 3 turns. I've done She-Hulk games where I won in 1 turn. Those probably won't beat Kang, right? Kang is a long fight. So he's going to test your deck for endurance. And if you're not ready for that, you're not going to be able to beat him. Next, we have Tower Defense. I find this one a challenge because there are 2 villains, right? Only one is active. But their force interrupts are pretty interesting. You lose the game. You can lose the game based on if the Avengers Tower goes down. So you kind of have to manage a lot. They do have very tough villains, okay? Oh, and I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but I'll mention it now. I'm ranking these all based on the recommended modulars that are on their schemes that they say. So these are all based on the recommended modulars. So she comes with a pretty strong villains in her modular. Not villains, minions. So if you draw them, her and Corvus, right? If you draw them, it could be really difficult to deal with while having to protect the Avengers Tower. So I think that one is a challenge. I know a lot of people don't, but in true solo, I find that one a little difficult. All right, next we have Escape the Museum. This one is a challenge. It's not too hard, but I do think it's a challenge. If you have a particularly strong deck with thwarting, it's pretty easy. It actually probably drops to like here. But if you don't, you're in for a ride because the game is all, you don't defeat him with health. You have to basically thwart out, use all of your thwarting to remove the threat from the main scheme. So if your deck isn't built for that, it can be a little tough. It can be a little challenging. There's also a lot that's going on with the fight. So it's not as straightforward as some of these, right? That's what makes it a little more challenging. Once you're ready to step up your game to the next level, this has a lot going on with it, so it can be a little tough. Next, we have Hela, and she made it into this spot as a challenge because she's definitely harder than these guys. She's not as hard as the next tier, and once you figure out her fight, I think she's actually pretty easy. The challenge is learning her fight, okay? Because she can't take damage until you get 3 side schemes out of the way. And your base, like your go-to is probably going to be, all right, I got to get the 3 side schemes out of the way. Let me do that quick. You can't get the side schemes out of the way until you get the minion that it comes with out of the way. And if you do it too quickly, you're going to die. Once you realize that you can take your time with the fight, build out your engine, kind of take out the minion and then wait the side scheme out, it becomes fairly easy. The challenge is learning the fight. Not particularly her, but learning how to fight her. And the last person we have as a challenge is Venom. So I have Venom in the C for challenge tier because he can be really strong. He can hit for a lot, and if you're not ready for that, it's just going to be tough. The side scheme isn't too hard to deal with. He punishes you for hitting him, right? He'll get a face down boost card every time you hit him. So you have to be ready to hit him for a lot and hit him for heavy attacks. And once you can do that, it's not that bad. He's particularly easy against protection decks that have retaliate or anybody that has retaliate, because one of his environments makes him take 1 more damage, and that would make the retaliate 2, a free 2 damage on the retaliate. So that helps, but he can be very, very strong. All right, so we had our E tier, we had our C tier. So we had our E tier for easy, our C tier for challenge, our, let's see, E for easy. Oh, sorry, D for deck testing, C for challenge. Then we have our B tier for be ready, as in be ready for a fight, because these guys start to ramp up the difficulty level. All right, so here is our B tier villain. So I'm just trying to fix a card on the other side. All right, we have the Collector, infiltrate the museum. Now, escaping the museum, not that difficult. Infiltrating the museum, however, that can be rough, okay? You can lose the game in 2 ways, or is it 3 ways, actually? You can lose the game by losing your health. You can lose the game by the main scheming out. Or he has something called the collection, where anytime a card from the board would be discarded, it goes into his collection. And if you have 5 there, you lose the game. Okay? So that makes playing allies almost a moot point, because if you play an ally and then they either chump block for you or you use their last consequential damage, they go into the collection. So you are punished for using an ally. He has cards that, like that, I think it's the advanced card, I forgot what it's called. The card that makes you discard an upgraded support. When a card is discarded from play, it goes into the collection. So if he has multiple cards like that, where you discard a card, a support or an upgrade, that goes into the collection. All right. It's not events, but allies, supports, upgrades, things like that, they will go into the collection and you can lose. So you got to be ready for him, because he's the first step up challenge that you'll get. The next one that I have is, we'll go for these in a little bit of order, is Claw. Claw by himself isn't that hard, right? You give him an additional boost card for his activation. So even his 0 attack is a little deceiving, because he can get 2 boost cards. What makes him difficult is his very small encounter deck, right? The fact that you have to use an additional boost card when he attacks, it makes you run through that deck really quickly. He can scheme pretty high, right? So if you're running through the deck, it's going to get an acceleration token. Then he can have a high scheme. And his the cards that make up his encounter deck, the villains are some of the hardest minions in this game, in my opinion. They're just so super hard. He's only got 12 health, but when you have to worry about his particular minions, It's extremely difficult. I think it's called Minions of Evil or something like that. I forget what they're called. But Masters of Evil. But yeah, be ready for him. He is very, very tough. And he's one of the first people that you fight, right? Because he comes in the core set. So look at the jump from that. Rhino, who I have as easy, to Claw, who's one of the harder villains in the game. Sticking with that, we have Ultron, another core set villain. So I say be ready for him, and he's in our B tier because he will make you discard cards and create minions out of them, right? So his schemes aren't the worst. His last one is. His second phase is actually pretty hard too. I think I've played him as expert once, but his second phase is tough. So first phase, right, you either choose, after he attacks you, you either put a threat in the main scheme or you use your cards to create a minion, right? You have the choice. Phase 2, you don't have that choice. He attacks you and you have to create a minion. So, and he has a lot of health. A lot of health. First phase, 17 points. I think phase 2 is like 21 or 22. So you can't even really burn him down. And you have to be able to deal with minions. So while you're dealing with these minions that are on you, you're not dealing damage to him. So be ready for him. He's tough. All right. Then I have Red Skull. So I have him. This one might be a little divisive. Might be a little divisive because some people will probably put him a tier higher. Since I play true solo, a lot of my decks are Justice, meaning that I do a lot of thwarting because that's what you have to worry about true solo. Red Skull is all about side schemes. Every single turn, he puts a new side scheme into play that you have to take care of right away. Since I particularly play usually Justice heavy decks, or since I'm forced to create decks, whatever they, in any aspect that have to deal with a lot of threat, he's not the next tier up difficulty for me because I'm ready for those side schemes. And when you remove his side schemes from the game, you actually get a little bit of a bonus. He does have fairly low health, 12, right? But the side schemes hinder you from attacking him all the time. But it's not the worst, right? Because if you have cards like Turn the Tide, which lets you deal damage after removing a side scheme, it's not the worst, but it is hard. And last in our B tier, we have Green Goblin Mutagen Formula. Another probably divisive choice. Some people maybe would think he should go a tier higher, but with a lot of the new cards that have come out, he's not easy, but he can be dealt with, right? He has really strong minions. He does a decent amount of damage, but a lot of the newer cards allow you to build out a decent engine, controlling his minions, controlling the side scheme, the main scheme. You know, he's hard. Don't get me wrong. He is hard. I think I've split with him. I think I have a 500 win ratio against him. 500 as in 50-50, right? For those of you who don't follow the sports. All right, so that is our B tier for Be Ready. All right. These are, I believe, some of this tier right here, I think, are some of the more fair, difficult villains. More fair, right? You know, they are difficult, but as long as you have created a solid deck, you can deal with them. Not easily, but you can deal with them. All right, now we are moving into our A tier. A as in the Almighty. The almighty villains of the game, okay? There's a tier above that. It's S tier. So here are A tier villains, the almighty. Now, another one that I think is going to be a little, people might question me on this one, but I'm putting this one up here in our A tier, is the Hood. I don't think a lot of people have a problem with the Hood. Here's my problem with the Hood. He's unbelievably swingy. You have to use 7 different modulars. You don't know what you're going to get. There is a chance that he can surge 3 or 4 times in a row. Okay? Like play a card and surge. Like play his foul play. So, and you can just get, so like you can get multiple encounter cards on you. He's extremely swingy. So, and it's, depending on the modulars that you put, he can be extremely difficult. So I think that's why he deserves to be in our A tier, because he can be extremely difficult depending on you, depending on what modulars you put in there. But aside from that, even by himself, even if you put easier modulars, you don't know what you're going to get because there's just so many in there. All right. Next, we have Nebula. All right. Nebula. So, Nebula, this girl's up here because she just can be really, really brutal. That side scheme can just build up really, really, really fast if you don't control her environments. She can get a lot of techniques on her that can just mess you up, and her encounters are brutal. You have to really be ready for her. She's just a really fast attacker, a fast fighter. And the threat on the side schemes and the main scheme can just build up without you even realizing it. So you do get the Milano with this, but you basically have to use the Milano every turn to control her ship environment, because if you don't, you're going to lose the game in a couple turns. All right. Next, we have Thanos in our A tier. All right, so I have Thanos in the A tier for multiple reasons. Number 1, he gets the Infinity Gauntlet. Anytime you add the Infinity Gauntlet to anybody, they become just a little bit harder. In addition to that, he's stalwart. He can't be stunned and he can't be confused, right? So you kind of just have to deal with him. He's fairly strong. He's got a base 2 attack. He's fairly hit pointy. He's got 16 health, but it's really that Infinity Gauntlet. That Infinity Gauntlet is brutal. And if you aren't able to deal, like the side, his main schemes they're pretty high. I think it's like 10, it's either 8 and 10 or 10 and 12. But if you scheme out, which is definitely possible, I've done it 2 games in a row against him, he makes you discard half of your deck. Not from the game, not just discard. You pick up your deck and you discard half of it from the game. You remove it from the game. So he is very, very difficult. That Infinity Gauntlet on him in particular is rough. And lastly, in our A tier, we have Zola. Man, Zola is hard. Zola is very difficult. He only has 12 health, but you are constantly dealing with his minions. And his minions are no joke. His minions will have guard. His minions get attachments on them almost every single freaking turn that give them more health and then guard. I had a minion once that I was about to beat him, but a minion that I was leaving on the board ended up with like 10 health, and the attachment after that was guard. So I lost because the minion just got too strong. He's got retaliate, so every time you do damage against him, you're taking damage. Zola is a force to be reckoned with. Extremely, extremely hard. So here's our A tier, our almighty tier. All right. And then we have our S tier. S as in scary. If you've played this game for a while, you probably agree with me about these 3. If you've seen what's come out, you know what's coming out here. I think these are pretty much everyone's agreed upon hardest villains in the game. Okay? And I will rank them in my personal easiest to hardest. And when I say easiest, it doesn't even mean they're easy. All right? These are not easy villains. First, out of this 3, I feel the easiest is Venom Goblin. Venom Goblin is a beast, okay? I have him ranked as easiest here because I think he is the most fair but hardest villain in this game. As in, he is the hardest villain in this game who's not completely cheesy, and as long as you're playing correctly, you got about a 50-50 chance of winning, honestly. And it's not 50-50 because he's it's not 50-50 because he's swingy. It's 50-50 because he's hard. All right? His attacks are hard. He schemes a lot. He's got 3 different side schemes going that you have to control. It's not impossible. It's completely possible. However, you have to be prepared for him. You have to have moved up these ranks and be ready to fight him. Next, I think people might be surprised with my next personal hardest one on this, because I think it's everyone's hardest, but it's Ronin. I don't think Ronin is the hardest villain in this game. I think he can be, okay? I think he can be, depending on what he gets. The reason why I have Ronin as second hardest in the game and not first is because he doesn't have Stalwart, okay? He can get Stalwart with this hammer, right? His hammer gives him Stalwart, but you can remove the hammer, okay? Your first priority should be to remove the hammer so that you can stun him, so that you can confuse him, okay? You basically want him to have the Power Stone, so you can't, like, he is the hardest and cheesiest boss in this game, okay? But that's because he's cheesy, all right? But he can be dealt with. He can be dealt with. You have to have a deck specific for beating him, right? I don't even know if all people can beat him. That I'm not sure about, okay? That I'm not sure about. There's a chance that maybe every hero could beat him, but there's definitely a chance that not every hero can beat him. Again, I have him in this rank because you can remove the hammer and you can stun and confuse him. My number one personal hardest villain in this game is Loki. The reason why I have Loki this high as the hardest villain in the game is because actually he's our winner, right? He'll put him in his little throne because he is Loki. Okay, so I have Loki as the hardest because he gets the Infinity Gauntlet, right? That makes anybody harder. Number 2, there are multiple versions of Loki you can play against, okay? He's got 5 different forms. You don't know which one that you're going to get in the middle of a fight. He changes them during the middle of the fight. 2 of them have Stalwart. So if you're like making progress, if you have him stunned, a card can come out to say change his form. He can get Stalwart. He can lose the Tough and Confuse. And you might just have to deal with that for the rest of that turn. Then the next Loki you might get might also have Stalwart. So his treacheries are more brutal than Thanos, right? He's just so hard. And I'm willing to bet that there is a hero in this game that cannot beat him. I don't know what hero that is. Like Ronin, I think there's a hero that probably can't beat him. I'm positive that there's got to be a hero in this game that can't beat him. He's just so hard. He's just so hard. You know, maybe like that hero that I'm saying that possibly can't beat him, maybe there's like a 1% chance, but he just is so difficult. He's got so much health. All of his forms have 20 health. You know, so he's 3 attack here. Some of his schemes have 3 scheme. You know, some of his forms have retaliate. The problem is he's a combination of Ronin and the Hood, where you don't know what you're getting. Sorry, he's a combination of Ronin, the Hood, and Thanos. You don't know what you're getting from the Hood aspect. He's extremely powerful and has extremely difficult encounter cards like Ronin, and he has the Infinity Gauntlet. I personally think Loki is the hardest in this game. Am I right? No. Am I wrong? No. Right? This is all subjective. This is all my personal rankings. You know, I know lots of people have Ronin first. I have slight specific reasons that Loki's first for me, but that doesn't mean that Ronin can't be first. This game is all about RNG. Maybe you play 50 games in a row where you get Ronin's worst cards, and you play 50 games in a row where you get Loki's easiest cards, and you'll never see the version of Loki that I saw, right? But for me personally, I have Loki as the most difficult villain in this game. But I'm very curious to what everyone else's rankings are. Do you have a hardest villain? Do you have an easiest villain? How much do you hate my list? Because everyone loves hating a list. So be a little kind in the comments. I'm just really curious to see what everyone else's thoughts are for their rankings. Take care.